Creator of the 200, the 202, legendary aircraft. I remember very well when they were first introduced. They really changed the name of the game. Richard?
Thank you. Well, I think that the focus this morning is supposed to be just on the kind of the history of the G-200 and really the airplane really started a number of years ago, long before it ever flew. And there's an article in the current issue of Sport Aerobatics that kind of tells a little bit about that whole thing, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but basically in the early 70s, I was flying a Pitts. I had a Pitts S2, one of the old original S2As, and was building a single-place Pitts. And the aerobatic community was beginning to discover monoplanes here in this country. Little mountain players airplanes were brand new. He's in the transition between Steve Zacro and his laser. And going to contests, I saw Leo's airplane, I saw Henry Hayes, Superstar, and I knew that the direction I wanted to go was in a monoplane. And so as early as the early to mid 1970s, I began sketching out the idea that I had for the G-200. And the concept was really pretty simple. I watched the lasers fly, and I noticed that they didn't have quite the same performance as Pitts S1. And so I thought, well, wonder why that is. And I talked with Leo quite at length, and as fanatical as he was about weight, his airplane was heavier than an S1. And so I thought, well, part of that's simply because the airplane's got 24-foot wing, and it's about 21 feet long, or about 20 feet long. It's a bigger airplane than a Pitts. So it made sense to me to build an airplane that was much closer in size to a Pitts and make it a monoplane so that we'd have the advantage of the nice straight lines. And so that was really the original concept. The final concept drawings of the G-200 were laid down in 1976. I still have a copy of that old original pencil drawing that I made in 1976. And there were only two significant changes that occurred to the airplane after that time. One occurred in 1980, about 4 years later. I was here at Oshkosh in the World Contest, and I saw this airplane from France, the Cap 21, and it had the first of the blunt nose slab-sided airfoils that are common on all of our aerobatic airplanes today. It was the first time we had seen those. The laser had a 23012 airfoil, and the Pitts obviously has the different airfoils on the top and bottom that are symmetrical, but they're not that same blunt nose slab-sided airfoil. And I wondered, what the heck is that airfoil? It looks so silly. We even were calling them ice cream cone airfoils or snow cone airfoils. And I started talking to aerodynamicists, had a number of friends, one family friend who was an aerodynamicist. I said, where's all the data on these airfoils? He said, well, I think it's some old German papers from World War II. There's some stuff, but the CAP aviation won't release the coordinates on the airfoil, so we don't really know exactly, but it sure works. Well, a couple of years later, while I was down at the Nationals, probably around 81 or 82, within a couple of years, I met a guy who worked for Bell, a guy named Ray Mort. Some of you may know Ray. And Ray worked for Bell, but he loved aerobatics, and he understood the aerodynamics. He had studied it and figured it all out, and he had actually designed the wing that was being built at that time. And so Ray was the first guy that I talked to that could help me begin to get some good data on those new airfoils. And so ultimately he provided the airfoil coordinates that you see on the G-200. That was one change we made to those 1976 drawings. The other was, when I first conceived the airplane, it was going to be a steel tube, wood wing, just like we were building all the rest of our airplanes. It had a wire brace tail, a very, very conventional airplane. It didn't take very long to start adding up all the weights, and I could tell that I wasn't going to see the weight savings that I felt like I really needed to make the airplane what I wanted it to be. And so in the late 80s, carbon fiber was just beginning to be available. Lancair obviously was doing a lot of things with pre-preg glass, but nobody was doing anything with pure carbon airplane. We were using carbon in spar caps and some other critical areas of airplanes. Extra had obviously brought out their new composite wing, and they were using carbon in most of the construction of that wing. But we really hadn't seen anything in a complete airframe. There was also, about this time, a white paper that was published. The EAA published it in Sport Aviation. I think it was in Sport Aerobatics as well. There's a white paper that was done by some engineering students and some folks in conjunction with Leo on building an all-carbon fiber wing for the laser. And it was fascinating. The interesting thing about it was, though, that they said at the end of the article that even though the technology was there to build the kind of wing that I wanted at the weights that I wanted, they estimated the cost for an all-carbon laser wing. Remember, this was in the late 70s. They estimated the cost to be around $500,000. And so, set that aside and didn't do anything else with it for a long time, but knew ultimately I want a carbon fiber airplane. There were coincidences and circumstances that changed in my life. In around 91, I had a business, owned a business that was building parts for, we built parts for Boeing. We also built assemblies and things like that for General Dynamics, a lot of aerospace things based there in Portland. And there was another company up in Seattle, IAC Aircraft, that built the push rods. Make a long story short, they wanted the company more than I did. And so I sold it to them, and I found myself with some free time and nothing to do except to play with this airplane. So at that time, I started bringing those drawings out and deciding, okay, am I going to really make this into an airplane, or am I just going to have this nice drawing that I can show people for the rest of my life? And I happened to show it to those drawings about this very same time. I happened to show those drawings to my girlfriend, and she said, build it. And she's here today, and I thank you. And she encouraged me. I doubt that it ever would have happened if it wasn't for that day. I still remember it. But I started trying to get in touch with the people who could help me understand how to build a carbon fiber pre-preg airplane. And one of the people that I was directed to was Martin Holman, who had done the engineering work for Lancair and a number of airplanes. Martin has passed now, but he was very instrumental in bringing composite materials, and particularly carbon fiber materials, into our industry and into our sport. And so I went down and took Martin's 1-week course in composite construction, composite design, and came away with the idea, yeah, this is doable. We can do this now. The technology, the price of carbon fiber has come down. The infrastructure is now in place that we can make this happen. So I already had most of the structural work done on the airplane as a steel tube, wood wing airplane. I gave all of that to Martin, and he agreed to convert that to layup schedules for a monocoque fuselage. And that was done and finished in probably 92, 93, we started building plugs and molds, and the airplane started going together. In 94, finished the airplane and flew it on March the 7th, 1994, which was my daughter's birthday. And went out real early in the morning so I could avoid all my friends, and flew the airplane. It was it's a completely clean sheet of airplane, a clean sheet of paper airplane. And while I knew it would fly, Eddie's here, and you know that you do all the design work right, and you do double check all the calculations. You know what the airplane's going to fly like, but it's still a little bit disconcerting to get into an airplane that is totally unlike anything else that's ever flown, and push the throttle up. And it was a very, very unique experience. One of the people that was there in the Portland area that helped me a lot in the very early stages was an unlimited competitor. He was flying a Pitts. He was the go-to guy in the Northwest when it came to unlimited. Greg Howard, who's flew the air show on Monday evening, and his 200 is right out here, the one with the green stripe. Very pretty one that's in the photo upside down. Greg was kind enough to help me very early on with a lot of the test flying of the airplane. I did the initial flight and some of the initial spin testing and all, but when it came to current unlimited competition, it had been years since I'd flown any competition at that time. So Greg helped me out, and I really appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Greg. The airplane flies today, and its handling qualities are really a thanks to Greg and to another young man, Scott Riddell. Just a phenomenal talent. And at that time, a very young man. Most of you probably have never heard of Scott. Scott was actually flew unlimited in an RV4 and did a very, very nice job of it. I think he was normally flying advanced. He went to a contest. They didn't have enough unlimited competitors, as I remember. And Scott said, well, I'll fly it. And he did. And that's the kind of talent that young man had. And he helped a lot with the fine tuning of the flying qualities of the airplane. So that's pretty much how the airplane came to be. Took it down to Sun and Fun in '94. It's interesting because when we went to Sun and Fun, one of the things that I was playing with were VGs. And we put, I was talking with Paul Robertson up in Arlington, who's kind of the VG guru. And we were really curious, what would VGs do on an aerobatic airplane? We knew that they would keep the boundary layer attached and would be, provide some pretty phenomenal performance. So we put VGs on the top and bottom of the wing according to the layout that he provided to me, and it was pretty interesting. I think probably the only person here that ever flew it that way besides myself is Greg. But the size of the loops that we could do with that thing and the low speeds were just amazing. We took them off mainly because they did also some kind of strange things with the snaps and spins. And just for an aerobatic airplane, we figured that they really weren't worth the additional trouble. But if you look at some of the early pictures, one of the photos I think has been published recently, you can see the VGs on the airplane, on the wings of the airplane. That was really an interesting experience or experiment. Anybody's got any additional questions about that? Be happy to entertain those. Talk to us later. Talk to Greg. I think there have been a few aerobatic airplanes that have tried VGs since then with kind of mixed results. But when I took the airplane to Sun and Fun, it had the VGs on it. Of course, that generated a lot of talk, along with the fact that it was a brand new airplane. And the question that I kept getting over and over was, are you going to build more of them? Is it going to be available as a kit? Do you have plans available? And at the time, I really didn't. When the airplane was first designed and built, I was building an airplane just for myself. I really had no intention of getting involved with the production of kit airplanes. There was a young man, an attorney there in Portland, also very active in our aerobatic chapter, Jay McGrosty. Jay was the first person that talked me into, he said, well, just let me pull parts out of your molds. And I said, okay, we'll do it. And so Jay McGrosty pulled the first set of parts out of the molds, and number 2, came to life. That airplane is still flying. I believe it's now in Atlanta. Still flying at air shows. Some competition. Greg has one of the, I think, what serial number 12 is yours? 14. So gradually we kind of let ourselves be pulled into the air business. And that was a real experience to go from building, 1 or 2 parts for your own airplane to providing everybody else what they need. The second most frequent question that I was getting back in those days, people would ask me, so when are you going to build in 2 places? Is there going to be a 2 places available? I love airplane noise. That's why we're here, really. We're waiting for one more. Another local IACer in the Northwest, a guy named Al Slater. United 747 pilot, who at the time was flying at Wolf Pits, was the guy who finally convinced me that, yeah, we're going to go ahead, and I had to admit that, yes, on my computer I did have a 2-place. That was already designed, and we had a few little things that we needed to do to it to make it ready to start pulling molds. But yeah, I would do it if he would agree to basically to fund the prototype. I already had started calling it the G-200. He brought in one of his friends who was also a United 747 driver out of Seattle, a guy named Dave Mosby. Dave was an ex-Air Force guy, a FUD pilot, and so Dave ultimately wound up owning the airplane after Al had kind of gotten out of, he had some health issues and gotten out of aerobatic flying. Dave flew the airplane for a number of years. Lou Shattuck flew it for a number of years also, and that airplane currently resides in South Africa. And any of you who were active on the website have probably seen some photos of it. The airplane's still going strong. I think they did have a runway excursion. They had an issue with some contaminated fuel, and shortly after takeoff, he had to put it down in a field that was not very smooth, and he wound up having to make some repairs to the belly. But I just exchanged some emails with him just recently, and the airplane's still going strong. They still fly it. He and his son both fly it on a regular basis. So that's kind of where the 202 went. There are a few differences in the original prototype 202 and all the rest of them that you see from serial number 2 and on. The biggest difference is that the fuselage is 1 inch taller, just to give a little bit more room. I'm kind of short from my waist up. I've got long legs but short torso, and so the airplane fit me just fine. But some of the other guys wanted just a little bit more height. But other than that, the prototype 202 is exactly like all of the rest of them. Shortly after that time, there were some other folks that became interested. One of the most interesting airplanes that I designed was Wayne Hanley came calling one day. Wayne had been involved with the 200. In fact, he flew it, and he did with one of our demo pilots here at Oshkosh, flew it in the show, and Wayne just loved the 200. And he said, you know, he said, what I've always wanted, he said, my dream air show airplane is an airplane that'll go straight up and accelerate vertically. And we kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, that's possible. And we had some similar ideas about the concept of the airplane. And he said, can you design me an airplane that would do that? He said, I want a turbine airplane that'll go straight up. And I said, well, yeah, we can do it. And, you know, in hindsight, maybe shouldn't have been quite so quick, because it was a huge job. But I designed the Turbo Raven. It's actually known as a Giles G-200, and we built the fuselage, the wings, the whole airplane was built there in Scappoose at our facility, and then we took it across the mountains over to Bend to some folks over there that did turbine conversions for ag airplanes, and they did the engine installation. And it was a PT6 A-34, I believe. Anyway, they put out about 750 horsepower, hence the G750. And those of you who were privileged enough to have seen the Turbo Raven fly, I don't think I ever watched that airplane fly that I didn't just burst out laughing. How many of you saw it fly? Yeah, it's a phenomenal airplane. I talked with Wayne just before I came to Oshkosh this year, and we were hoping that we could get him here. How many of you know Wayne personally? He's still flying, still going strong, and it was a great experience. There's some photos. If anybody's not familiar with the airplane, there are some photos inside. So anyway, that's kind of the story of the G-200, the G-202, the Turbo Raven. We also built a G-300, which was a single-place 300 horsepower airplane. And unfortunately, Marta Meyer lost her life in that airplane due to a canopy failure several years ago. Real tragedy. She was on the World Aerobatic Team and in Oklahoma practicing for the Nationals. But those are the airplanes that I've been responsible for. I guess the only other piece of the story that you might be interested in is that Dominique Roulon from France, from CAP Aviation, he was president of CAP at the time, approached me here at Oshkosh in about 95, 96, could have been 95 or 96. He came out to Scappoose, flew the airplane, fell in love with it, and persuaded the owners of his company to fund a certification effort for the 202. And we entered into a joint venture with CAP Aviation. They were going to call the airplane in Europe the CAP 222, and then we were working to have reciprocal certification here in the States, and we would build them here as G202s. That process went very well. The certification was almost complete. We were literally down to only 2 items to be left on the DGAC's checklist. One was a canopy clearance issue for the front occupant. They wanted a little bit more room in the front canopy. When we did the crash test, when we took the fuselage and slammed it into a brick wall, it's painful to watch that. The dummy's helmeted head got too close to the front canopy. In fact, it broke the front canopy. So they said, yeah, you're going to have to redesign the canopy. The other was the 15G seat, this 15G seat requirement. We had gone back and forth with DGAC as to whether that requirement was really applicable to our airplane. Originally, they gave us a letter saying no, it was not. Later, they came back and said yes, that they were going to insist that the airplane have a 15G seat. Oregon Aero was working on that particular item at the time that the certification ceased due to the bankruptcy at CAP Aviation. So unfortunately, the airplane never did finalize its certification, but it was comforting to know that it got really, really close. So that's kind of the story of the G200, G202, G300, Turbo Raven. When I shut down Acrotech in the late 90s, it was my desire to see support for owners and builders continue. And one of our owners is a guy named Chris Myers. Most of you know him. Chris owned the airplane that is it's the green one that's out there right now, the G202. And he had some really cool ideas about what he wanted to do to it. And so we came to an agreement ultimately for Chris to purchase all of the molds and the remaining inventory of parts that we had there, and with the idea that he would supply parts out of the molds, supply fittings and hardware to the builders, and continue on support. And also, he made it very clear that he wanted to make some modifications, and he wanted a 6-cylinder engine. He wanted a 300 horsepower engine. And so he did. And he put the engine on it, he put a straight wing on it, and ultimately moved the tail back 7 inches, which was the same as what we'd done in the G300. And he made a bunch of other additional modifications to the airplane. Structurally, it's significantly different. Longerons go much further back in the airplane. And I think this afternoon at 1, the MX folks are going to be here and tell you a lot more about that process, because they are very, very different airplanes now with the changes that they did. And ultimately it became the MX2. And the latest version of it is out here, the black airplane in front. So that's kind of the history and kind of where the airplane started out and where they've come. That's about all I've got to say this morning. Been more than happy to entertain questions from anybody. Yes?
What kind of education and training did you have to let you design airplanes?
Well, that's interesting because started out when I was just a little kid. I can never remember a time that I didn't love airplanes, drawing airplanes, building airplanes out of balsa wood, whatever. And I started learning real quick how airplanes flew and what made them fly, because I'd crash my RC models and I'd have a pile of balsa, and I didn't have enough stuff left to put the airplane back together the way it was originally. So I would cobble together something that looked completely different, and it didn't fly the way I wanted it to, so it would crash, and I'd have to figure this thing out. We also had a family friend who was a guy named Wallace Sutherland, who was an aeronautical engineer. He was an aerodynamicist by trade, worked for Lockheed, and when our family would visit in the summer, first down in Burbank where he worked at Lockheed, he would give me books that were basically the textbooks that he had used for his aeronautical engineering education. And so even prior to going to high school, I was reading to try to figure out all about aerodynamics and the stability of aircraft and what makes them fly and how to make them fly the way you want them to fly. I'm basically self-taught. And then that continued on up into high school and college, just reading everything that I could possibly find on aerodynamics and whatever, structures, just the whole thing. So it's kind of a trial and error method of putting back together balsa wood airplanes. So it's the one thing that I can point to that helped me understand the different relationships of tail size and What's that?
Did you finish the pigs?
No, I never did. I moved in 1985. I moved out to Portland, Oregon, and the fuselage got sold to another guy there in Chattanooga. And one of the last things that I did before we moved to Oregon was to haul that fuselage down to across the line down into Georgia. And I don't know whether that airplane was ever completed or not. I kind of lost track of that test. Also had a Pitts S2A that I sold about that same time as well. Yes.
Would you just comment on the tail modification that everybody talks about?
Sure.
Flying magazine article, etc.
Sure. And there was there's a letter that, what's that? He's asking me if I can comment about the various tail modifications that are available on the 202. Let me give you just a little bit of history. It's no surprise, no secret to anybody here that there have been two fatal structural failures in the 202 in the tail. NTSB asked me to get involved about 3 years ago, and it involved several trips back to Washington, D.C., and to look at and try to understand exactly what happened. The NTSB's research was extremely thorough. It even included the building of a new finite element model of the tail. And their ultimate conclusion was that there was nothing wrong with the structure of the 202's tail. One of the things that we found in examining a lot of the airplanes, Eric Menace in North Carolina was very much involved in this. He was looking at a number of airplanes, and we found a wide variance in builders' techniques and also substitution of unauthorized materials. Eric found one airplane that had the horizontal stab attached with just plain old boat cloth and polyester resin. Unfortunately, that airplane had held together, but we found things like that. We found voids in the seam between the top and the bottom of the fuselage. So there were enough things that Eric found. I was sent a number of pictures. I looked at a number of airplanes myself. There were enough variations in builder technique that we decided that there's something that should be addressed. And Eric designed what he calls a cello bulkhead modification. It's been done to a lot of 202s. It fits in the tail at an angle, and it's much larger than the banjo bulkhead that's there now. And that's a very good mod. He also changes the vertical fin skins back to carbon fiber. Originally they were glass, so that it's transparent to radio signals. So that's Eric's mod. I fully endorse it. I don't see any issues with it. I encourage people to consider it. There's another mod. Some of the folks decided that they wanted the extended tail that MX had done to the MX2 series of airplanes. And there are at least 3 202s that I'm aware of that are currently flying with the MX tail. The MX tail, the fact that it extends 7 inches further aft than the 202 has a different structure. It has a different bulkhead structure in the back, and I don't see any issues or any problems with that mod. That's a very good one. Unfortunately, I don't know how many people are interested in doing that because it's very invasive to the airplane. You basically have to tear the airplane apart to do it. The one change that a lot of people have liked is that we're supplying new carbon fiber fin skins, and I know some people have gone that route. They're taking the fin skins off primarily to make sure that they were installed right the first time. If Would you guys like for me to get a little bit more technical and exactly what's there? All right. One of the things that our original finite model had told us, this goes all the way back to the structural substantiation report that was done at the time of the certification. One of the things that we knew was that the tail of the 202 is a monocoque construction, which means that the skins carry the loads. That's different from the way most of us historically have built airplanes. And so, and I think that's the reason that people didn't understand that they had to provide sufficient load pass into and out of those skins, and that's the reason people would think, oh, that's just filler, and so I can use boat cloth in that area. And when the NTSB did their study, they shook their heads and said, you know, this is exactly what we're finding, and what our model is telling us is that the skins carry the loads and they carry them appropriately, but the banjo bulkhead, which is, I think a lot of people were assuming we're carrying those loads and said, well, the banjo bulkhead looks fine, so I don't need to worry about anything else. The banjo bulkhead really doesn't do very much at all. It is a structural stiffener for the fuselage, which it does very well, but it does not transmit the loads from the horizontal stab into the fuselage. It was never designed to do that. So the load path is from the horizontal stab into the vertical fins, which is then into the fuselage. And if that load path is provided correctly, then there are no issues at all. So some people are pulling their fin skins off. We did this, I believe it was just recently done for Bob Stark's airplane, and Bob's airplane was built very well to begin with. It had several hundreds of hours of hard aromatics, and when they took it apart, they found absolutely no problems whatsoever. And it was put back together earlier this year with the new, we supplied carbon fiber fin skins, and those are available. Somebody can send me an email if you'd like. We can provide those to you if necessary. So those are the three modifications. There's quite a few 202s that are still flying. People have just inspected them real carefully, make sure that the layups were done correctly. Layups were done on the outside and the inside. The ones on the inside are very difficult. They're very difficult to do. They're almost impossible to do after the airplane is finished. That's why we have to pull the fin skins all the way off and put them back on again if you're going to really check that area carefully. Don't see that there's any issue really with the 200s. The 200 is constructed much the same way, but the original fin skins they're a little bit, the geometry, let's put it this way, the geometry is different in the 200 simply because it's a smaller airplane. And we've not seen any issues or any problems with the 200 at all. Yeah.
So as you know, I'm finishing one of the three remaining G-200 kits. And I know it's important when you go through the honeycomb, you grind out and fill it there so as not to create any place for stress cracks. But I've got everything from like number 8 nut plates, holes for number 8 screws, like a 3/8 hole for an OAT for a wall, which are just through the honeycomb. And I'm wondering, is there a minimum size of hole where you don't worry about grinding and filling the flaps, or where you have it all up to avoid stress?
No.
All of them?
No. Anytime you penetrate the skin and you expose raw honeycomb material, it's going to be our recommendation that you clean that core material out, fill that core material, and make sure that it's all what we call healed up, that you heal that. The reason for that is that a honeycomb structure, the skins on both sides of the honeycomb are carrying the loads. That's your structural component. and they act together. The shear loads in one skin are transmitted through the honeycomb to the other side. If you interrupt that load path, then you have to make sure that you heal that up. And I'm trying to put this more in layman's terms, but that's the best way to understand it. And I would say that if you're working on a 202 or any of the airplanes now, carbon fiber airplanes, if you're working on or if you're having a shop work on them, be sure that they thoroughly understand modern advanced composite construction. Part of the problem that we found was that historically fiberglass composite parts on airplanes were wheel pants and cowlings, and it really didn't matter. They were not structural, and these are. So anytime that you penetrate the skins and expose core, and in the builder's manual, there's a whole section on that, explains what to do. And I would say, I guess to answer your question, DJ, if you had a needle that went through, might not worry about it too much. I just fill it with some epoxy on each side or whatever. But as far as I'm concerned, no, there's not a minimum size opening that you can ignore it. Besides, it worries me just a little bit that you're putting a screw through, because if you then torque that screw at all, you're going to crush the composite material. So.
Wasn't my design.
Yeah.
That particular variation wasn't my doing.
Yeah. No, I fixed that. And see, that's exactly the kind of things that we found. And I think now there are a lot more people that understand composite construction. 25 years ago, we ran into things like that. Yes.
So I'm sorry, just a little basic question related to that. How far do you get rid of the honeycomb? Just like beyond the head of the screws, slightly beyond that, or just hot material?
What we used to recommend was 1 inch.
1 inch?
1 inch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's a company called BCT. There was a company called BCT Aero Incorporated who done a couple of kits. Do you know how many? And like if there have been any problems with or these two that they do?
I don't know anything about that company. No, sorry. Yeah. What kind of an airplane are they producing?
Oh, they built the Giles identification.
I've not heard anything about it. I'd be interested to know who they are. Are they fairly new?
No, this was in 2004. 2000.
I'm not familiar with them, I'm sorry. Were they building kits or they were producing kits?
Assembling kits.
They were assembling kits. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't know of them. Yes.
I understand that the 202 wing was just a sort of extension of the length of the 200 wing. I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's
No.
what I understood.
No, it's not.
To have a scale factor work.
I'm sorry?
I was going to ask the question, how the scale factor work on that, but just extending the wing. Because as I witnessed, it wasn't taking on.
No, the 202 wing is a completely different wing. There are no similarities aerodynamically between the 200 wing and the 202 wing. I'll load this down to the B-51. Maybe it's a stick. I mentioned earlier, Ray Moore had provided the coordinates for the G-200 wing, the airfoil. When I got ready to do the wing on the 202, we were down at the Nationals again, and over dinner, he he said, I told him what I wanted to do with the airfoil, and he said, well, it sounds like you've already designed the airfoil. He said, I'd go with it. He said, sounds good to me. He did some analysis on it for me later. If you'll notice, the airfoil on the 202 is, it's the same thickness, but it has a slight convex area just ahead of the aileron. The rear spar is quite a bit thinner. What the computer was telling us was that airfoil provides just slightly less drag. It had some other advantages over the 200 airfoil. So consequently, it wound up being a completely different plane. So the spars, the rear spar, particularly the ailerons, they're not interchangeable at all.
Following on from that, the degree of bluntness of the nose, as I recall on the 202, the part of the forward was about like 20% forward or something like that. On the MX2, it's about 16%. What are the performance differences will make the airfoil blunter?
Well, there may be some people here in the room, and I know who some of you are, that can answer that question better than I can, because I'm not a theoretical aerodynamicist. I do know that we see the thickest portion of the airfoils all the way from what Extra's done to the original cap. Original cap was very far forward. I've spent quite a bit of time with Dave Lednesser out of Seattle. He's the designer of the MX wing. And in order to really be able to answer that question, you have to look at all of the curves and the analysis that they've done on the individual airfoils. My guess is that there's maybe a little bit more drag. There's probably some difference in the lift numbers, but probably not significant. So I really couldn't answer that in detail. Anybody else?
We've had a couple of problems with canopies on our 202. Do you have any recommendations of things to particularly look out for or changes?
Are you talking about the composite portion of the canopy or the latch?
The latch.
The latch. The latches are a off-the-shelf item. They're actually a Glasair latch, and MX is continuing to use them. However, the original split ring that held the lever in place should be replaced with a cotter pin because they can come out.
Yeah, that happened to us.
Yeah. So we would recommend that everybody do that. I think all of the new ones, as far as I know, all the new ones have the cotter pin instead of the split ring. If you take a look at yours and you see split ring in there, either get a new pin or some people I know have actually drilled them. I wouldn't want to try to do that, but make sure that is replaced. The other thing is that I would strongly encourage people. Canopies have been the bane of our sport, going all the way back to all of our airplanes, not just the monoplanes, but the biplanes. Everybody that has a canopy, sooner or later, has got a canopy problem. And canopies are kind of an afterthought to a lot of us. And we don't do as much maintenance. We're not as careful with our canopies as we should. And we should know that canopies can kill us. And we need to look at the maintenance of our canopies and make sure that the hinges are maintained properly. If there's wear that are replaced. There's an old article in Sport Aerobatics a number of years ago. I can't remember who wrote it. I think it might have been Sam Burgess. And he made the statement in there. He says, if you're an aerobatic airplane, if you're flying it, you're breaking it. And just emphasizing that we need to be looking at all of these things. Latches, The 202 canopy and the 200 canopy both are quite light, and they were designed and built that way on purpose. But if you're having some cracks in the composite, we've had a number of them on right below the latch. If people will run the engine with the canopy open or not latched, that can flex right there, and then it'll wind up having a crack. So just make sure that those items are maintained properly, and when you do see cracks, repair them. Just to go back for a second to the accident in New York that unfortunately took the pilot's life. There's evidence that there were maintenance issues that were neglected and were intended to be dealt with when the airplane returned to its home base. And you know, when we see problems with our airplanes, particularly with composite airplanes, when you see problems with them, fix them and make sure that you understand what they are. I'm also reminded of the PJ-260 that an airshow pilot had a cracked lower support tube on his horizontal stab, and when it was pointed out to him, he said, "Oh, well, we don't need these, the wires carry all the load." And he took them off, held them up with the camera, went out and lost the tail of the airplane and lost his life. I think some of you probably know him, remember that a number of years ago, tragic accident. So remember, what we do is inherently has its inherent risks, and understand the issues. When you see issues like that with the canopy, when you take care of them. Anything else? If not, thank you guys very much. And we're having a reception here this evening, right after the afternoon air show for all G-200, G-202 owners, pilots, friends, wannabes, all of the friends of the airplane. We're going to be right here. We'd love to have you come.